Hello and welcome to another Excel. It's definitely not Excel. Welcome to another Python tutorial. We're going to continue our exploration of the Win32com library, but in this particular example, we're actually going to focus on how can we integrate like Excel with our SQL databases or our SQL pools that already exist in Python. So the idea is that maybe you have some data that exists in your Excel workbook. You want to import it into an SQL database, or maybe you have some data that exists in an SQL database. You have some queries that are written in Python, and you just want to be able to write those queries where they'll directly export it to the Excel workbook. How would that look like, and really what would we have to do? So that's what we're going to be covering in today's video. It's going to be broken into a couple sections where we kind of talk more about the SQLite, and then we'll go into actually getting the data and then putting the data back into the Excel workbook. I am assuming that you're a little bit comfortable with SQLite and SQL in general. I'm not going to be going into too much detail about kind of what you're seeing on the SQL side. I'm assuming that you've seen it, that you've worked with it a little bit before, and now you just want to see how to integrate that with the Win32com library. Okay, so I got my Excel workbook. I got some data right here. The goal is to take this data, put it into an SQL database. All right, first thing we're going to do, we're going to import our libraries. So we're going to import SQLite 3. It's a great library. It's very easy to use. And then we're going to also import our win32com.client, but we're going to use an alias. We're going to call it win32. Okay, so now that we've done that, let's create basically an in-memory database. So this is not a database file or anything like that. All it is it's creating a database in memory. And then what we'll do is we'll create a table in that database, and then we'll define some functions where we can insert information or pull information from that database. So very simple, but the idea kind of holds if you have an actual database file or something like that. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll insert a cell below. First thing we're going to do is going to create our memory database and our cursor object. So this is basically the object that we're going to use to interact with our database. So we'll create a new variable, we'll call it connection. That will equal our SQLite 3 library. We'll go into the connect method, and then we'll specify that we want to do a memory database. So it's a string colon memory colon, you're good to go. And then we need to get our cursor objects. And so we'll take our connection object, and then we'll call the cursor method. And then from here, we're good to go. We have our new cursor object. Let's create a table. So create a table in our database. What we'll do is we'll do cursor.execute, and then we'll do triple bracket string, so that way we can do multi-line strings, and we'll do the create table, and then the name of the table, which is people. We'll put our bracket, and then from here we're just going to name each column in our table along with the data type. So the first column will be named text, it will be named name, and then it will have a text data type. The next one will be age, and then that will have a data type of integer. The next one will be salary, and then that one will be, again, an integer data type. And then the final one will be named gender, and then that one will be of the data type text. With that, we're good to go. We get this nice little reminder that we now have a cursor object, and we're all good to go. No errors, so we should be fine. We'll insert a new cell below. And here we're going to define two functions. The first function is going to be the one where we'll insert data into our database. And then the second function will be able to pass through a parameter that will allow us to perform just a simple query, nothing too fancy. One where we're just going to have a where condition to go and pull all the information related to it, that particular condition. So the first one is define our insert function. We will call it define insert underscore person. It will take 4 parameters: name, age, salary, and then gender. We'll put our colon, and then we'll say with our connection object cursor dot execute. and then we're going to say, hey, insert into people the following values. We're going to pass through a tuple. We'll put in some placeholders. The first one is name, comma. The next one is colon age, and then colon salary, and then finally colon gender. And then we're good right there. And then from here, I'm going to put my little escape character. So we'll put my comma. I'll put a forward slash so I can do multi-line. And then we'll pass through our little dictionary that contains the key and then the value that we want to pass through. And so the first one will be the name, the colon, name, and then the next one will be age. This again will be age. And then the next one is salary, colon, that will be salary. And then the final one will be gender. And then again, this again will be a colon gender. And we're good to go. We've defined our insert function. So we're going to insert into our database multiple rows of data. Each one of them should have 4 pieces of information: a name, an age, a salary, and then a gender. Okay, so now that we've inserted it, we need to define our query function. So this will be the one where we can go and retrieve our data. So we'll define our retrieve function. And so this will be called defined get by age. We'll take one parameter, age. We'll put our colon. We'll do cursor.execute. And then we'll do select all columns from people, so the name of our table, where the age is greater than the one that we passed through. And so we'll say desired age. And then what we'll do is we'll put our basically our little escape character. Again, it's a dictionary. Oops. Put our escape character, and then we'll say desired age. And then this one will simply equal our age parameter. So once it executes that query, we need to go and fetch all the data. So what we'll do is we'll say, hey, return back to the user the cursor object. We'll call the fetch all method. So this will fetch all the records in that query. You can do one, you can do many. We want all of them. And so this will return back all the records to our user, at which point we can then manipulate them. It's going to come back as a list of tuples, but when we pass through the data, it will be a tuple within a tuple. Okay, so now that we've done that, let's run it so that we have our functions active. We'll insert a new cell below. We're good to go. And then from here, now we're going to start working with our Excel application. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to create our instance of Excel. Well, really, it's kind of getting our active instance. It's going to equal Excel app. We're going to go into Win32. We'll do early binding. So we'll do generate cache. And then we'll do ensure dispatch. We'll pass through a string of the program ID, which is the Excel application. I'll print it out just to make sure we have that instance. Looks good to me. I'm happy. Okay, and then from here, we'll get the workbook. And so we'll say, hey, Excel workbook equals the Excel app. And then I'll just keep it simple. We'll just take the active workbook. Ideally, if you're kind of in a work environment or something like that, you probably wouldn't want to do something like this just because the active workbook can change very often. I put the name just to verify we have it. I see SQL workbook.xlsx. Looks like it's matching, so I'm good to go with that one. Okay, next we'll get the sheet. The Excel worksheet equals the Excel workbook. And then we'll go into the active sheet. And then that one's good to go. So from here, now we need to get our range of cells. So all this little information right here. Now, obviously looking at this, we can tell that it's from H1 to, what is that, K11? But let's kind of just add some variety to our examples. Let's just assume we wanted to make it dynamic. So that way, as we add rows, our program can respond to that, and it's not necessarily dependent on us manually typing it in or something like that. It will just respond to what we're kind of seeing right over here. So what we'll do is we'll actually leverage some concepts we learned in a previous video, so ones that are related to the Excel constants. So if you look at what I'm about to code and you're going, wait a minute, what's going on here? Please watch that video. I go over in detail kind of that library and how we can leverage it to kind of make our code a little bit more readable and easier to follow. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to get our Excel constants. And the first one will be defined as SQLite. We'll go into Win32.constants, and then we'll call the Excel to write. So that one is like, imagine if I was here and I press Control right arrow, it's like I'm going to the final column to the right. The alternative one that we're going to look at is the Excel down. So it's like I'm pressing Control and then going with the down arrow. That will take me to my last row in my continuous range. So the next one will be Excel down, Win32, constants, Excel down. To prove that to you, let's see what we get. So it comes back with this little property basically, and then if we had to manually do it or we didn't know the name of it, we could pass through -4121, and then that particular method will recognize what we're talking about. It will recognize that we mean, hey, go down or go to the last cell in that continuous range. So now that we've done that, let's get the last row and last column. And so what we'll do, we'll define our last column as the Excel worksheet. We will go into our range object. We'll start at H1, and then we'll call the end property. Well, in this case, it's really kind of like a method. And then it will be Excel write, and then we want the column. And then we want the last row. Again, worksheet range, H1. Again, we'll do end, Excel down. And then in this example, we want the row. So if I do row, oh, sorry, not row, last row. Row 11. Let's take a look. That looks like row 11, so it's good. Okay, so now that we've done that, we've defined our last row and our last column. Let's get the first and last cell in our range, right? So if we pass through this cell and then this cell, really what we're talking about is the entire range that belongs here. So we need this cell and then this cell. This one's easy to figure out. It's H1, so that's, what is that? 1,8. So we'll say first cell equals the Excel worksheet. We'll go into the cells object and we'll pass through the row, which is 1, and then the column, which is 8. Then we'll get the last cell. We'll go into the Excel worksheet object. We'll call the cells object. And then this one, we want the last row and then the last column. Okay, so define the first and last cell in our range. And now we can actually go and get the range, the data. So we'll get the data. Very straightforward. We'll call the new variable, we'll call it raw data. We'll go into our Excel worksheet, and then we will go into our range object. And then we'll go into our first cell, and then to our last cell. And then we'll call the value property. So this will return all the values that belong to that particular range. And then let's see what we get. Okay, so that looks good to me. Name, age, salary, gender. We start at Alex and we go down to Mary. Let's take a look and see if we got all that. We start at Alex, we go down to Mary, we go all the way over here. Looks fine to me. So, keep in mind what's being returned back to us is a list of tuples within another tuple. So the outer tuple acts as our column, and then each one of these inner tuples is our row of information. So now that we have our data, let's insert it into a database. And so that won't be overly complicated. It's actually pretty straightforward when you look at it. So we'll upload the raw data into the database. And so we'll say, hey, for each row in my raw data, I'm going to start at this one because I don't want this one. So I'll say, hey, starting from 1 forward, take that particular row and then get the details from it. Get the details. And so we'll say, hey, create a new variable. That will be name. That will be our row. And then it will equal 0. So the first element in that tuple, which is the name. And then we'll get the age. That will be the row. And then again, that will be, the first one. So that would be this. So that's kind of the confusing thing about Python, right? We start at 0. So 1 is really 2, 0 is really 1. And then what we'll do is we'll get the salary. Now, in this example, this is a decimal object. Our SQLite database is expecting an integer, so we need to convert it. So what we'll do is we'll say, hey, convert that to an int, whatever it is. We want the second one, which is really the third. And then finally, we want the gender, which is simply the last element in our tuple. So this one right here. Perfect. Now that we've done that, let's insert the data. So we'll say insert underscore person, and then we'll just pass through everything. Name, age, salary, and then gender. So once I do this, everything should run smoothly. What I'm going to do is I'm going to insert a cell below, and then from here, we'll pull the information that we put in there. So we ran it, there was no feedback, but now if we try to query the data, we should be able to get it. So we'll pull the newly inserted data. And so what we're going to do is when we get all this information, I want to store it in a variable that I can, easily manipulate. So we'll say, hey, call it people. And then we'll say, hey, get by underscore age. And then this example, let's just say, hey, anyone who's greater of age 10. So that should be pretty much everyone. In fact, I think it is everyone. What is going on? Uh-oh, there is a syntax error. What is happening? Gotta love when that happens. Select star from. I've got to look at it again. From people, where, age. I don't see anything wrong with it. Let me try that and see what happens. Oh, sorry. I realized what it was. The little greater than sign shouldn't be over here. It should be over here. So that was my bad. That's not correct. We want it to make sure definitely where age is greater than our desired age. Let's run that again. Make sure we pass through the new changes. Let's try this again. Okay, so I didn't get any errors. That's always a good sign. And hey, if we look at it, now we have a list of tuples. So with that being said, now we can put it back into our Excel workbook if we want to. So what would that look like? Well, again, let's make it a little bit more dynamic. Let's just assume we don't know how much we're going to get back. So really what we want is we know at this point that it's going to have a certain number of columns. So really, if we just take the first row and then we count the number of elements of that row, that will tell us how many columns. And then if we just take the total length of our particular list, that will tell us the number of rows. And then really that's kind of all we need in order to kind of populate it. So we'll insert a cell below. And so we'll basically get the number of columns and rows. And so we'll say row length is equal to the length of our people data, and then we just want the first row in a sense. And then what we'll do here is we'll print it out. So I'll display it just so you can see that, hey, what's coming back to us, does make sense. So we get 4. So it's saying, hey, this particular row is 4 elements long. So I guess it's kind of going 4 columns wide, but I don't know. That's kind of how I like to think about it. I mean, you guys can always change it if you think that's confusing. It's kind of up to you. Okay, next one is the column length. This one's actually a lot easier. We just pass through the length of people. And then with this, again, we'll just display it and we'll say, hey, it's just simply the column length. So this one's telling us it's 10, which makes sense because there's 10 records. So it should be 10 rows deep. Okay, so now that we've done that, it's kind of like what we were doing up here where we need to define our first and last cell. And so, really, if I wanted to, I could just simply copy this. There's nothing really stopping us from doing that. Here, though, what we're going to do is we're going to change it. We're going to say, hey, we now want it to be this one and then this one. So really, this is cell A2. I don't want it starting at A1 because that's where my header is. I want it to start here at A2. So I'm passing through the second row and then the first column. And then with this one, we're just going to change this a little bit. This is going to be 1 plus the column length. And then this one will be the row length. Now, why did I do 1 plus? Again, I want to start here. I don't want to start here. I want to start here. And then row length, that doesn't matter because there's no data there. So once I've done that, I can basically define the range and then populate it. So define the range. We'll put in a new variable, Excel range. Go into our worksheet object. Go into our range object. We'll pass through the first cell, then the last cell. We'll take that, and then we'll set the value property of that range equal to our people list. Now, technically, if you wanted to, you could just do that. There's nothing really stopping you. It's kind of up to preference and necessity, but in this demonstration, I'll just, break it out. So populate the range. So I'll snap this over here. And let's see what we get. Bam. Okay, so it worked perfectly. Data has now been put back into our Excel workbook. Don't see any errors. Formatting's all good. So I'm happy with that. And with that being said, we made it to the end of our video. Sorry if that was a little bit of a longer one, but I think this is a good video just because it's kind of giving you different examples. And, everyone knows with SQL databases or just databases in general, they're fun to work with, but there's also a lot of complexities that can go on behind the scenes. So with that being said, if you have any questions, please, put them down in the comments below. This video actually came from a user, so that's great. If people have ideas for other videos, I'm always open to hearing them. There's a couple other ones that I'm working on right now that other people have suggested. I kind of heard his recommendation. I said, wow, that seems like a good idea. Why not do it, right? So yeah, definitely more coming out. I will kind of give people a heads up. I might be posting in some days multiple videos. So if you haven't, you might want to make sure you put on the notification thing, because what I've noticed happens is if I'm posting and you were to say skip a week, you might see 5 or 6 videos. And then what happens is the videos kind of go past and then people kind of lose track as to what the new ones are. But I notice if they have the notification on, it's pretty good. But again, personal choice. You don't have to if you don't want to. So with that being said, we'll finish it off. So thanks again for watching, guys. We'll see you in the next video.